Good morning. My name is Jane Ranum, and I chair the Sanctuary Discernment Work Group, a 6-member group appointed by the Westminster session in the fall of 2019. Associate Pastor Elena Simone Tyler provided pastoral support. This work group was appointed by the session after it received a letter from a Westminster member and a student deacon requesting that Westminster declare itself a sanctuary congregation. We presented our final report and recommendations to the session in October of 2020. Social justice forums are built around a common theme, and this year's program theme is Wade in the Water, Becoming Anti-Racist. Every forum held this year is meant to encourage all of us to listen intently to voices beyond those of white privilege and to reflect on how we as a community of faith can help change a racialized system. Today, we welcome a panel who will be addressing the experiences and needs of the diverse immigrant and refugees in our community. Among the charges given to our Sanctuary Discernment Work Group by the session was to identify opportunities for Westminster members to engage in meaningful ministry in support of immigrants and refugees, as well as opportunities for advocacy on their behalf. Resources used by our work group included interviewing 2 asylum seekers who are currently supported by members of Minneapolis faith communities, interviewing active lay leaders from 5 Minneapolis congregations. We learned about their discernment processes and the lessons they had learned, as well as about effective nonprofits that were providing robust support to meet the needs of immigrants and refugees. One of the speakers that was especially helpful to our work group is with us today. We are pleased to welcome Michele Rivero to our panel. She was particularly helpful in suggesting specific ways congregations can support immigrants and refugees and in identifying effective nonprofits. Since July of 2018, Michele has served the city of Minneapolis as its Director of Office of Immigrant and Refugee Services. Prior to joining the city, she practiced immigration law for 18 years, where she learned firsthand through her clients about the diversity of immigrant and refugee experiences while handling a variety of immigration applications and processes, ranging from asylum to U.S. citizenship, immigration court removal proceedings, and appellate immigration proceedings. We are also pleased that representatives to 2 of the nonprofits that she identified that are actively supporting immigrants and refugees could also be with us today. I will now turn it over to Michele Rivero, who will introduce her fellow panelist. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Jane, and thank you so much to the Westminster community for inviting us to participate in this conversation today. Very grateful. I will quickly introduce my fellow speakers, Ekta Prakash, the Executive Director of CAPI, and Michele McKenzie, the Deputy Director of the Advocates for Human Rights. And we'll leave it to them a little bit later to introduce themselves and their work in a little more detail. I will give a quick summary of the work of the Office of Immigrant and Refugee Affairs, some of the challenges that our communities have faced pre-pandemic and post-pandemic, and a little bit of information regarding upcoming dates that are meaningful, that community members may be interested in learning more about and celebrating. So just a quick backgrounder about me personally. I'm the daughter of immigrants from Colombia and Italy. And so in addition to my previous work as an immigration attorney, the topic of immigration, immigrant integration, and inclusion is extremely important to me because of my own family background. With regard to the work of the Office of Immigrant and Refugee Affairs, as Jane indicated, the office has been in existence since July of 2018. It's a one-person office that is contained within a larger department, the Department of Neighborhood and Community Relations, which does a significant amount of outreach with different cultural communities, including the Southeast Asian, East African, and Latinx cultural communities, in addition to outreach within the context of neighborhood organizations, as there are specialists who work with the city's 70 neighborhood organizations. The primary work of the Office of Immigrant and Refugee Affairs includes to ensure that electeds, as well as community members and city staff, are aware of immigration developments. As we all know, if you read the paper or follow the news, there have been so many changes over the course of the last 4 years, an estimate of at least 900 changes through, I believe, July of this year. And so ensuring that electeds, community members, and city staff are aware of these changes and how these changes impact communities is a focus of my work. Identifying policy initiatives that the city can champion, actions, whether symbolic from the standpoint of resolutions or with more teeth, are part of the work of my office. Also, the city of Minneapolis has relationships with several immigration legal service providers, of which the Advocates for Human Rights is one. And so ensuring that community members are aware of the fact that they can access immigration legal services regardless of an ability to pay is part of the work of my office. In addition to the advocates, we partner with Volunteer Lawyers Network and Immigrant Law Center of Minnesota. These organizations not only provide direct legal representation, but also host, particularly in the era of COVID-19, virtual forums to ensure that community is aware of immigration developments, and also work to train attorneys, because there are not enough immigration attorneys to address the critical need for immigration legal support within our communities. And so training attorneys who may not specialize in immigration cases is part of the critical work that these organizations do that's funded by the city. Another focus of the office is to plan events and be a repository of information, recognizing and highlighting the importance of immigrant and refugee communities in the city of Minneapolis. 15% of the population of the city is immigrants, and so it's a sizable percentage of our population. If people are interested in learning more about the Office of Immigrant and Refugee Affairs, the information that we share with communities, the activities that we're engaged in, it's very easy to look on the OIRA website. It's OIRA Minneapolis. And you can find information about me, the work that the office does, important occasions and dates that people should be aware of, and immigration updates and more. With regard to challenges that immigrant and refugee community members have faced, and work that we as a city have done since the start of the pandemic, I can say that the focus has expanded significantly to include providing support with regard to very basic needs: food insecurity, housing insecurity, employment-related concerns, including employment discrimination and fears that people have in the workplace. While I am not the subject matter expert by any stretch of the imagination in these areas, connecting people to the resources that exist is part of the work of the office. So one example with regard to food insecurity is the city hosts a weekly food distribution effort at Corcoran Park that I'm fortunate to be a part of. So understanding what the needs are there, assisting in providing culturally appropriate food to community members is an area that I've been more engaged in recently. With regard to housing, even though there is an eviction moratorium that has been extended monthly by the governor, that still doesn't eliminate the requirement to pay rent. And so communities are concerned in some situations, there's pressure from landlords to pay rent. And so ensuring that people know that there are legal resources. For example, there's eviction legal support through another nonprofit organization called Mid-Minnesota Legal Aid. Ensuring that people have that connection and are aware of that resource is part of the work of my office. Also, trying to ensure or help people learn about financial support. For example, Hennepin County is offering through CARES funding financial support for individuals who need rental assistance. So that's another area where, that wasn't really much of a focal area of my work before the pandemic, but now has become a much more critical area of support. So I want to make sure that there's enough time for the other speakers. So I'll just wrap it up by saying that the two upcoming events that I think it's worthwhile for people to be aware of are Human Rights Day, which is December 10th, and International Migrants Day, which is December 18th. Human Rights Day this year will mark the 72nd anniversary of the adoption of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights by the United Nations General Assembly. And it is worthwhile to take a moment to look at the United Nations website. I believe their theme this year is Recover Better, recognizing that the pandemic has really highlighted the ways in which communities are disproportionately impacted, particularly communities of color are disproportionately impacted by this pandemic, both from a health standpoint and from an economic standpoint as well. And how can we work together to ensure that individuals' human rights, universal human rights, are upheld? So this is something that is a focal area for the city of Minneapolis. There will be more news to come. Please follow City of Minneapolis Facebook page and also website to learn more about how the city is recognizing this important day this year. With regard to International Migrants Day, that, as I said, is December 18th. That's an opportunity to recognize the challenges that migrant communities have overcome in leaving their home countries, fleeing their home countries, and coming to the United States. There is information available on the UN website also about this important date, and I'm happy to share information if people are interested in learning more. And with that, I will stop and turn it over to Ekta.
Hello, this is Ekta Prakash, and I just want to make sure, do I have to go first or Michelle? I thought it was Michele McKenzie going, but it's okay. I can talk about my work. So my name is Ekta Prakash, and I just want to say hello and thank you to Westminster and everyone to bring this panel together. It's been very empowering to talk more about what's happening at the ground level. And we are very grateful to Westminster. They have supported our work in the past. So, I always think about circle of life, you meet sometime in your lifetime again. So, as a background, I'm an immigrant. I came here, it's been 20 years. I started my career at the very bottom at the retail because I couldn't find a job, even though I had double masters. So as a, immigrant person coming in this country and starting from working at the floor of a retail and climbing that career laddering at CAPI USA, I think it's been an awesome journey for me, myself as an immigrant person. And so my passion goes with the refugee immigrant community and the dedication, the hard work they do, because I can see myself there. One day I was there, and I think that struggle became a passion, and that's why I enjoy my work at CAPI. So that's just about me. I have 2 kids, and this pandemic has been not great for anyone, and we are learning. I think each day has been a challenging day. I want to give a little background about the work, the pre-pandemic and the post, like in the middle of the pandemic, and thinking about the future, like how we will see ourselves, after 8, 9, or 10 months. As we started this year with a lot of great kind of like aspirations for the organizations, and we got hit with the pandemic and the lockdown, it was very challenging for an organization of mid-size, especially providing services to refugee immigrants and other communities of color. Our mission has expanded as we, started as an AAPI organization in 1982 as a culturally specific food shelf. CAPI saw that we were serving, African, West African, Latinx, other communities, not just AAPI. And so we expanded that to other communities. And I believe that a success of one community is always, you want to be inclusive to other communities, and then you become a beautiful society and a community. And so that's the mission of the work. And we focus on 3 things: is equity, inclusion, and accessible. So, we opened a new headquarter in Brooklyn Center, and I want to pin on that, and I think that's been amazing because the immigrant population, especially in Minneapolis, Northwest Suburban, has tripled in the region, but there was very few nonprofits. And so we took a risk of opening a new home, and I think that's very welcomed in the Northwest Suburban. Um, but we also, got stressed out with this pandemic because, CAPI was serving like 5,000, 3,000 individuals each year. Our numbers have increased. It is like 8,000 plus so far. So I'm just talking about our November number, like end of middle of the year. And we might, exceed it to more than 10,000 individuals. But going back to what Michele Rivero was referring, the basic need has become a top most important need in the community at this point, because people are losing their jobs, people are losing their home, and there's food insecurity. So our food shelf, which is very culturally specific, under the basic need, we have 3 pillars: basic needs, economic empowerment, we do employment and job and training. And then the last pillar is the civic engagement, where we did the census work and civic participation, which I'll talk more in the detail. We saw our food shelf was just bombarded with people, and not just serving Minneapolis and Northwest Suburban. Like, we are getting calls from greater Minnesota. There are seniors who are from the refugee immigrant community, and they're looking for that cultural and linguistic aspect so they can connect. I think the biggest thing what has happened during the pandemic is the fear. So there's a fear about immigration, what's your status is going to be. And there's a fear about the whole election and the administration, how it's going to impact people of color and immigrant community. The people were talking about, if things go in different direction, we have to leave the country. And so there was a lot going on. And so people were not asking for help. I think people were left out. We received a phone call from this elderly woman, and she's from the Asian community, and it's a very heartbreaking story. So she had $8 in her wallet, and she said to one of our staff member, I can take a Uber and come to CAPI food shelf and get food, or I can save my $8 for the rest of my week so I can sustain it. And we quickly turned around and said, we will make sure she's on our delivery list. So we are doing food delivery to seniors and added more who needed it. But what was happening within the organization, it's creating more pressure on the staffing. So I'm really grateful and appreciative to our team and our staff, because they were adapting to work from home, which is not the nature of the work we do. So I think it's important for funders to understand, and a bigger audience, that our staff are adapting new ways of working, learning technology, using Zoom calls. We don't do it. And it's still learning. We have a lot of challenges and hiccups, but I think staff are stepping up. And if somebody is a financial coach, is working in the food shelf, because our numbers in the food shelf is just, it's rising. We need more people. And behind the scene, I also want to say is that it's a curbside pickup. So that means there's a lot of labor intensive behind the scenes. So when you get the grocery boxes, you have to sort it, pack it, put in the car. So we have one staff working in the food shelf. He's our hero, I'm saying it, and we are adding other staff, but every staff member chimed in. And I think the beauty of the work in a nonprofit is to make sure we are helping the community. It doesn't matter who's coming for that need at that moment. So that's just of what's happening in the ground level. Even in the employment and training program, we had to move everyone on the virtual platform, like online learning, and which is very difficult because people have technology issues. They don't have all the technology. So we had to go back and forth and make sure people have the laptops, the technology, so they can finish their credentials and certifications. But in the refugee immigrant community, because of the language, that creates another layer of problem. So, and people have children at home. I think that's another issue that, you're dealing with your professional life, your personal life. You are the frontline hero, you're the essential worker. And then you have to make sure your kids are doing well at school. I think it's a mental, it's a trauma. And I see myself in that same situation, and many of us. It's really hard. So I think one thing we really did at CAPI was, giving our staff the flexible time as a nonprofit. And even though, our staff are not well paid, you're a nonprofit. So what happened was, like, make sure our work is done, but there is time for them, for their family, for the children, and there's flexible time. So I think, that understanding, the clear communication during the pandemic, we had meetings every day with our staff team. So we are making sure we are all connected because we were not seeing each other. People were feeling left out and isolated. And so many of our seniors in the program, they were homebound and they didn't want it to even have food delivered because of, the fear of the virus. So we had to do a lot of education. One great opportunity CAPI had as an immigrant organization, and we felt like, CAPI has the capacity to get the funding and re-grant to other smaller nonprofit. And we collaborated with 5 to 6 smaller nonprofit, and we said, we get the funding from a bigger funder and we give out to you guys. So you don't have to worry, because what was happening, all these deadlines are going back and forth. It's too fast. People don't have a grant writer or capacity. So that was the beauty of the work. And I think it was amazing because we could have, the funds were easily accessible to smaller nonprofits. We were able to disperse them faster. And we created a triage model called the phone call. As you go to a clinic, there's a triage nurse. So every staff member is calling their clients and community members. And what we were doing is asking them questions. Do you need food? Do you need housing assistance? Or do you need SNAP application done, unemployment, insurance? Have you done your taxes? Have you done your census form? And so every staff member is calling their clientele and community members to making sure what is the need, and making sure helping them with all these different needs. If there's a one need or two need, referring them to, rent, housing assistance program, because we don't do direct housing. So I think that was very important. And but again, what happened was, it's the same staffing, the same capacity. So everybody is taking more work and spreading it out. So I feel very appreciative as a leader of the organization that staff were able to adapt and change so quickly. And there's some great, essential heroes in the organization who are doing food delivery. That's not in the job description, who are doing different work. And I'm amazed. And so my biggest worry was, I wanted to make sure my staff are fully funded, they have a job, they don't lose a job. And I think that's very important for every nonprofit to think about. It's like making sure your frontline workers are there, because they are the most important, piece of the segment in the organization. If they're not there, the work, who's going to do the work? So I want to make sure they're well paid and they have enough time to do the work. But that's the key of the work. And I think that excites the staff, is like, you're committed, there's somebody behind you. If you fail, that's fine. There's always challenges, but we learned a lot through this process. And our food, we have, everybody's working from home, but the essential workers are in the building. So people are going every day, but we are making sure people are following the protocol. We have heard a lot of other stories, like people, the fear of just getting, the testing. We are doing a lot of testing outreach. We are doing a lot of media communication on, where are the testing sites, where are the, testing happening, how do you go? So we are navigating community members, especially in Minneapolis and North Minneapolis, in the refugee immigrant community, making sure people have the resources. So providing them communication like every day. So there's a lot of work in different languages. So now that's another stress, is like, The beauty of the work CAPI, what it makes CAPI unique is like we have 30 staff and collectively we speak 15 different languages. So that gives a kind of a fun way of working that we can make the translation and interpretation quickly. But we are doing it every week, new stuff and changes coming from the CDC. So there's a lot of information, but what's happening is it takes time. Sometimes there's a delay and people are not getting the information in the right way. We also, collaborated with some of the city of Minneapolis and Hennepin County on some housing grants. So we were able to give out more than $74,000 in rental and utility and mortgage. And that was just like a snapshot in 2 months. We are not expert in housing, but you know what? We have to do it. So I think the bottom line with the pandemic, and I believe we are in the middle of a pandemic, and I tell my staff we'll do whatever we can. So I think that's the lesson we have learned through the process. I think the future we are thinking is the post-trauma. There will be mental health, people being isolated. So I'm thinking about, how, our leaders and funders and everyone can think about what is the post impact of the pandemic. And I think there'll be a lot of issues around that, and how can we work together. And the fear around immigration is still there, just like, what's going to happen. So we are hopeful for the new administration and hope things will be better for them. So I'm going to move it to Michele McKenzie. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Michele and Ekta. It's so good to and the host just muted me. All right, I think I'm back. Okay, sorry about that. I was saying it's so good to see Michele and Ekta, even if it's by Zoom. They are amazing women, and it's really an honor to be with Westminster today. We have our neighbors downtown Minneapolis, and have worked with many Westminster folks over the years as volunteers, board members. It's a wonderful community, and I'm just sorry we're not in your beautiful space, because I always enjoy coming there. The Advocates for Human Rights is an organization that's been around for almost 40 years. We were founded in 1983, really to bring the power of volunteers to transforming our community and our world, and make it one in which those principles of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights that Michele talked about are brought to life and have meaning in our day-to-day world. And I sort of think of the human rights framework as the original intersectionalism in its approach. When Ekta's talking about basic needs being so critical and so precarious, but at the same time, fear of deportation, that balance, we have to think of all those things. And this conversation that you're having here about anti-racism, is squarely within that, where it's each of these pieces. We're living through two pandemics, really, of both the trauma of the disease of COVID-19, and also the trauma of the aftermath of George Floyd's killing. And that murder brings to life, our witness of that murder brings to life this real call to action. And we see having to balance all of this trauma as a community in one place. And for our immigrant and refugee neighbors, it's been really difficult. Many live, right in the neighborhood, and are experiencing the racism in our community firsthand. We were talking earlier this week on another forum about the just atrocious rise in hate crimes and violence against Asian Americans and folks in Minnesota, and how traumatic that is. So the intersection really of race and immigration is so deep. It's like our immigration system was built on exclusion and alienage and citizenship, and this idea of people being considered eligible for citizenship if they are free white persons was the first law in the United States, the first immigration law in the United States, and it stayed in place without any real amendment until that infamous period in the 1880s of Chinese exclusion and the Asian exclusion laws that came out of that. That was the first real amendment to our immigration law that was based on free white persons. Right? And so we think race is embedded in immigration. And even today, the system that we're operating under, the family immigration system, is one that was designed in the mid-1960s, really as a compromise to allow family to stand in as a proxy for the old national origin quota system that allowed several 100,000 Northern Europeans to come to the US every year, and people from other countries to come up to 100 individuals per year. Our makeup in the United States, our makeup in Minnesota is not accidental, it's very intentional. And the system that we're working in today really is the same one. That law hasn't changed. That's still the basis of our immigration system. And lots of people talk about our immigration system being broken, but I think it's really one that's acting precisely as it was designed. It's one that we need to really think about the purpose of and the design of. And as we're looking forward at the advocates into sort of the next days in a new decade, we're looking forward to really moving and leaning into the Global Compact on Migration that was negotiated by the world community absent the United States in the last 4 years. That is something that recognizes that migration is human, and it's not a problem to be managed. It is the way that humans operate. There are 250 million migrants in the world at any given time. That's just what we do. We're people, we move, and we need to figure out how to harness that strength and resilience and make it work in a safe and people-centered way. That's sort of how the framework is envisioning it, and the language that they use, that people-centered way that respects people's human dignity. What we've seen, unfortunately, not just in the last months of the pandemic, not just in the last years of this administration, but really for a very long time, has been a real sort of assault on the right to seek and enjoy asylum from persecution. Jane mentioned at the outset that the Sanctuary Committee really looked at and had a chance to talk with some asylum seekers. That right to seek and enjoy asylum from persecution that's on account of your identity, your race, your religion, is under, it's just being eviscerated in front of our eyes between administrative actions and new rules and an attempt to deter asylum seekers that started in the previous administration, an escalating use of detention. All of that is really undermining one of the most fundamental human rights protections that the global community has, which is the ability to leave your country if you are being persecuted there. That system, for Westminster members who know Dwayne Cronky, he was right there at the forefront in the early 1980s, trying to defend that right to seek asylum. So if you know him, ask him about those early sanctuary days, and I'm sure he'll be pleased to tell you. But we've also seen so that asylum protection has made people more precarious, but we've also seen continued detention. And this is one of the things that really we have seen a difference under the pandemic, and a real challenge for us as our clients are in detention. We in Minnesota have several hundred people in immigration and customs enforcement custody, or ICE custody, in county jails around the state. As the pandemic came in, the jails locked down, and it was very difficult for us to talk to our clients, to find them. We certainly could not see them to get papers signed. people were languishing, waiting for hearings. People were isolated from family and friends, and most horrifyingly, really trapped, waiting, in a confined space, waiting for COVID to strike them. And when we've been hearing about continuing deaths in Minnesota's custodial facilities up until this week, I think we've heard some. The sort of backbone of our organizations, legal services, our policy advocacy, really is volunteers. And we're so fortunate to be able to recruit and train volunteer attorneys, people like Michele referred to earlier, whose legal practices are in other areas, who then are trained to handle asylum cases, or to handle detention cases and represent people, trying to get them out of custody and trying to make sure that they have a fair day in court as they face an immigration judge. We last year had over 1,000 volunteers join the advocates in our work on that and a bunch of our other initiatives around the world. But those volunteers are facing those same barriers to connecting with clients. It's hard, and it's been a real struggle for us to ensure people have a fair day in court, meet all the deadlines that they have to meet, get those papers in, and then wait, sometimes for months and months and months until they're eligible for work permission, to wait, not knowing whether the answer will be yes or will be no. Asylum cases have been delayed. They haven't interviewed people since the pandemic has struck. So people have been filing their applications and waiting for a day to even be heard. Meanwhile, their families are back home. They're without work authorization. It's just very, very unstable and very, very difficult to move forward with your life when you're in that holding pattern of waiting for your immigration case. One of the most powerful projects that we've had that has launched in the last few years is one that actually is available to volunteers, really anybody who has time during the weekday, people who are able to go out to the immigration court and serve as court observers. We've had more than 600 people participate in our Court Observer project that we run with the University of Minnesota Law School and with law firm Robbins Kaplan here in Minneapolis, that has brought people into our immigration courtrooms, and they're monitoring detained immigration hearings. They've seen the way things operated pre-pandemic, and they've been watching now as all those hearings are taking place via video with people in different rooms. One of the hearings took place where the person who was being deported was not on screen. The screen was frozen with the image of the person who had gone before him, and the hearing was taking place. They were just, it was just like a cardboard cutout of the person who was facing deportation that day. Our observers have really been struck by just how unjust the legal framework is, that it really is designed to exclude. It's designed to trap people. It has very few ways to make it possible for you to move from an undocumented status to a legal status. It is one that gives huge authority for detention so that people can be detained as long as there's bed space. In the US, budgets for over 55,000 beds available on any given day. There's plenty of room to detain. We have our volunteers really struck by the unfair processes that people face, and this fast-moving process with lots of jargon, lots of forms, everything in English, and no right to an attorney. So the financial support from the city of Minneapolis really helps make sure that people have an attorney by their side. There's no public defender system in immigration. The lack of dignity people face coming into jail or into the courtroom, shackled hand and foot in orange jumpsuits, raising their right hand while chained together, struggling to sign things while they're shackled. They can't put their headphones on for interpretation without assistance. It's just a degrading and process filled with indignity. And then, really, I think the observers have seen what immigration lawyers, what immigrant communities know, that the racist policing, that all of the problems embedded in our criminal system get amplified in the immigration system. One of our observers said, he's been out dozens and dozens of times and has seen one person of a European country in detained immigration court. Everybody else is a person from Africa or from Latin America or from Asia. And this is not an accident. It amplifies the way that all of our other public policy is structured. So the intersections there are just really profound. And I think it's something that gives us pause and a reason to really think about things holistically in this system. So I'll leave things there and I think turn to questions perhaps.
And
thank you to the three of you for your excellent presentations. And before we begin the questions, I just want to reinforce what the different descriptions that have been given by our speakers about the either their own personal immigrant experience or those of people with whom they work. In our sanctuary discernment work group, we had a very diverse group of 6 members, and one of the members was someone that Michele McKenzie mentioned, a lawyer, Dwayne Cronky, in our own congregation, who has represented asylum seekers. And I can't stress enough what I think all these speakers would say is the importance of understanding to a much better degree the immigrant experience. In fact, one of the strongest people on that was a member of our own Westminster community who was a first-generation immigrant from Cameroon. And she was talking about how important it is to hear the stories, because each one of the stories is one story. And in fact, one of the reasons Westminster in our discernment process recommended that at this point in time, Westminster was not ready to offer physical sanctuary. And that was because all the folks tell us, all the experts, but all the people who have experienced this experience have said it is very important to listen to immigrants, what their real needs are and what their real experiences are. But you could tell with our speakers, there's so much that we can do as we learn here at Westminster about the diverse immigrant experiences. First of all, we can always provide financial support, because that's the kind of support that is needed to make sure that basic needs as well as other needs are met. But those of us who have expertise and understand the delivery of healthcare or human services, or have skills with other languages, can always volunteer as either English language learners in that kind of a program, or they can volunteer as translators, which are often, I'm sure, needed, whether you're trying to access healthcare. And in fact, that was one of the things we learned from one of our congregations, is that translation was often needed and there wasn't the expertise there. You've already heard about the need for pro bono legal assistance, but I hope you heard what Michele McKenzie said about observing the immigration court system. In fact, we learned from several of the congregations, how their members were getting really a lot more knowledgeable, just sitting and witnessing to what the word she used, the inhumanity of it all. And I would also say that it's very important for people to understand what she stressed, which is you're not entitled to a public defender in an immigration proceedings. Those are deemed civil proceedings. And so that's why pro bono legal assistance is so important. But I encourage folks to attend other forums that we'll be having later, which hopefully will engage people about opportunities to learn more and opportunities to serve our fellow refugees and immigrants in our community. And now, Phil, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you. And, picking up on Jane's words of encouraging engagement, I think as a first round, what I'd like to do for each of our three guests is to highlight ways that Westminster folks and the larger community, we have a lot of people that tune in on Sunday morning to these programs that are not even Westminster folks. And that's great. We want to provide opportunities for people to get engaged. And I know maybe Ekta, we could start with you, because you talked about the food distribution programs and maybe need for volunteers. I know Michele talked about the detention and immigration process and the court observers. And I've heard that even has an impact on the judges. And with the presence of people there, and maybe Michele could talk about some of the city things. So maybe Ekta, we could start with you with your perspectives on ways people can be engaged.
Sure. Thank you so much, Phil. Before I talk about the engagement, I just want to, I think I missed a little background on CAPI, the organization and the acronym. So CAPI started in 1982 as Center for Asian and Pacific Islanders. And that was right after the Vietnam War, people were coming here. So it was a Asian specific food shelf. In 2008, we changed the name to CAPI USA, which we included all other refugees and immigrants. So the acronym is just CAPI USA. It's a branding issue, but the history is there. There are a lot of stories. As Jane was talking about, everyone has a different story. It's not the same story of every refugee and immigrant. And I also want to highlight, I know Michele McKenzie mentioned about George Floyd murder and the riots, because we were right, our office is right there, a few blocks from there. And it was very, very traumatizing. And the fear, I think we all witnessed and we lived, in our children. And I will never, forget, that moment in time, because as a leader of an organization taking care of a mother who was dying, and then George Floyd murder, I didn't get time to take off to take care of my dying mother. So, the regret is there in my heart. But at the same time, my mom always said, do well for the community. So as an immigrant, person, as a daughter of a mother who is always telling me, make sure you are there for other people, I think that's important. And that brings all the communities together. And I think that's the messaging here. And how people can get involved with CAPI is, there are many ways. One of our biggest need is the food shelf, the basic need. We are looking for volunteers to work in our food shelf, and we have a very systemized way. We are limiting 2 people at the same time. So if there are 2 people from the same family, it's better. And we are looking for people who can help deliver food to our seniors. So our staff are driving around. If there is a way we can get that. We are also looking for a good way to talk about, we are getting a lot of calls for legal issues because of, all the immigration and the fear. So when we were calling some of our folks in Minneapolis for housing assistance, they thought it's a scam because of, the fear of immigration. Then, okay, you're providing us assistance for housing, something is wrong. So I think there are a lot of ways people can help, is especially in the food shelf, food delivery, volunteer. We are also doing, CAPI is also moving into financial coaching and budgeting. So online platform, if there are ways people can provide some technology support, like, just some kind of a different training. There are a lot of young folks who are so tech savvy, they can help even our staff, providing some webinars on technology and something like that. So, these are some of the ways I would say that they can, contribute and volunteer and work. And I think that's, yeah, we'll greatly appreciate it.
Michele McKenzie, do you want to go next?
Sure. Well, Ekta, I'm so sorry for your loss. And thank you for sharing that. The need for legal representation, like you said, fear is there, and being able to walk into court with somebody by your side is huge. Being able to know that the forms you're filling out are right and they're going to the right place is an enormous weight off people's minds. I struggle to fill out the most basic forms in my daily life. And, I can't imagine filling out one that is deciding my future and the future of my family in a language I don't know. You really, to have that person by your side, so that pro bono legal representation is so important. And if anyone is interested, I suspect there might be lawyers in Westminster's congregation, maybe one or two. We'd love to have you join us as volunteer attorneys. We also need court observers all the time. A lot of folks have been unable to go out to court because of the pandemic. And so if you're able to do that, we really welcome you. And interpreting and translating is constantly a need as well. Every piece of paper you file with immigration court or with the immigration service has to be translated. So if you have a newspaper article talking about you have to have that whole newspaper page translated. That's a lot of work and very expensive. So volunteers are always needed. But I wouldn't limit your engagement to just what you can directly do, but also using your spheres of influence. This is a time for us to really say we need an immigration policy from our city, where Michele is working hard to make sure policies and procedures and everything can really reflects that human-centered work, or that person, to our federal government and our state as well. So raising your voice, commenting on proposed regulations that are out there that say, we're taking away work permits from people, or making sure you do call those members of Congress and say, we need an immigration law that actually cares about the dignity of the human being, that isn't rooted in a white supremacist framework. That do not underestimate that phone call that you make, or that conversation, that deep conversation you have with a neighbor. We know that is the single most important transformational piece of the puzzle is empathy and human connection. So use all of those skills. And just before I turn it over to Michele, I'd say the sanctuary discernment process you went through is the perfect microcosm of that, right? It's the perfect model for that. And no matter what the decision in a sanctuary discernment process, people are talking and thinking and really engaging with a difficult and complex issue. And that's the way to approach all of this work, with that open heart. So thank you. Yeah. Michele?
Yeah, so I would just make a couple of comments piggybacking on what Ekta and Michele have stated. I would welcome people to reach out to me if they are interested in identifying ways to be supportive of immigrant and refugee community members that they may not immediately think of. One example that I would give is rebuilding efforts of immigrant-owned businesses. There are many immigrant-owned businesses, as Ekta is alluding to, that were impacted by the civil unrest that followed the killing of George Floyd, and those businesses are still in the process of recovery. Someone recently contacted me to find out, what can I do? You know, I have this business expertise. How can I support immigrant and refugee owned businesses that were impacted, and being able to connect that person with the individuals who are city employees who are already working on that issue, who are already working with community members, is an important way for people to lend their expertise in an area that really counts. To the point that that Michele was alluding to regarding regulatory changes, I think it's so important to recognize that even though we are looking towards a new federal administration, a new presidential administration, we anticipate that there will be significant positive changes in the context of immigration. For the last period of this current administration, there is a flurry of regulations that are very damaging to immigrant and refugee community members. I know that Michele alluded to one. I know that Advocates also has action alerts, as does Immigrant Law Center of Minnesota, where you can learn about these regulations, read them, and take an opportunity, take a moment to respond. One thing that's very important to keep in mind is that many of these proposed regulations have a 30-day comment period, which is such a short window to submit a thoughtful response. And so if people have the time to consider these regulations and think about the impact on immigrant and refugee communities and actually submit a thoughtful response, the more responses received, the less likely the proposed regulation will be able to be finalized, and the more likely that the incoming administration will be able to issue a moratorium on that regulation. So if there's another thing I would stress, it is that please don't think that just because we're at the tail end of this current administration, that the harm is coming to an end. It definitely is not, and it's worthwhile to follow Advocates, Immigrant Law Center of Minnesota, City of Minneapolis. We do an immigration bulletin too, highlighting immigration developments and other resources that provide accurate information regarding proposed rules and other actions it's worthwhile to comment on.
I have to piggyback on Michele for a second, because what you said about the harm at the end of this administration certainly cannot be underestimated. I've been practicing like Michele for 20 plus years, and we've never seen our asylum system as under attack as it's been really since those opening days when the US administration just refused to grant asylum to people from countries because we supported their governments. This is really a low point, but it is not going to change in the next administration. It's not going to bounce back. It's not the previous administration, the Obama administration, and many of the chief leaders in that orchestrated some really horrific policies that were very, very harmful to children, to families, to asylum seekers, and to immigrant communities. We had the most deportations of any time under the previous administration. Every administration through the past 40 years really has not focused on protecting immigrants and refugees, and has looked at that as an area to either bolster, get tough credentials, or broker political deals, or trade off at the last minute. And we really have to push hard for protection, for looking at, again, people-centered policies, and for not like letting this incoming administration off the hook for the human rights violations that might occur under their watch.
Well, I want, on behalf of the social justice team, I really want to thank all of you for thoughtful participation. Michele, Ekta, Jane, everyone that's contributed, and the people behind the scenes whose faces we don't see today. There are plenty of opportunities. We hope that you'll take advantage of those. We do want to announce that the following Sunday, we are going to be doing an interactive joint forum with our adult education team entitled Racial Justice, Doing the Hard Work, Systemic Racism, Vulnerability, Finding Our Voice, and Stepping into Action. And so thank you again for all of the work of our participants and for the participation of all of you listening as well. Thanks again.